Could I just do a quick poll of the room? Is anyone here under the age of 22? I'm so excited to give you all experienced people life advice. This is going to be awesome. When I was 14, I got my first job. Now, tell me, a few ideas, what does a 14-year-old work as? What are common jobs for a young person? Fast food, lawn work, newspaper. Okay. All right, you're too eager. I need to slow this down. My first job was a data entry job, which also makes sense, but it's not the first thing you think about. I was just so relieved not to be wearing a hot dog suit, standing in front of a hot dog stand. I was relieved not to be bagging people's weird groceries while trying to talk to them. It was excellent for me because I knew that I would be able to sit behind a desk all day. I didn't know that this would cause posture and spine issues for the rest of my life, but that's a different story. I was excited. There was just one problem. I get bored really easily. And data entry is about as stimulating as watching an ant try to cross an entire grass lawn. If you've ever tried that, it takes a while, but it's actually more interesting than data entry because those ants are fierce warriors and I respect them. This is kind of what it looked like. I needed to take a list of emails, thousands and thousands of emails, copy email address, first name, last name into a separate spreadsheet so that we could upload that into our system. This is what it looked like. Finally, I was done with it. I decided to search for a better solution to the problem. I looked up on Google how I could maybe automate the process, how I could take a list of thousands of emails and extract that information. And a few hours later, I had done nothing practical, but I had built a program using something called AutoHotkey. Basically, it allows you to write some code that will automate a process for you. I had spent hours doing this, and I had accomplished nothing in that time. But as soon as I started that program, zip and zoom, all of the emails were being exported into the spreadsheet. Picture this, 14-year-old me with my little circle glasses, pushing them up in delight and taking a walk because my computer was doing the work for me. Efficiency to me is a beautiful concept. It's something that has guided the way I work for a long time now. Unfortunately, it has a bad reputation. I see it as a hidden source of freedom. But many people see it as something that managers hold over their heads and beat them with. Because they think, man, managers who care about efficiency, all they want to do is time you and look at how hard you're working, and they're never going to care about you as a person, just the productivity that you emit, right? Let me give you an example. You have a choice between two managers as you're interviewing for a job. The first one says, I care about my people. I want to make sure that they succeed and have a good work-life balance. Second manager, he says, I care about efficiency. I want the people under me to work hard and get things done quickly. Which one do you want to work for? She points this way. I think that's right. Okay. Does everyone agree with her? Yes. Have you thought about the fact that the second person might have the same goal as the first person? He said he wants his employees to be efficient. Well, if you're efficient, maybe you can go home and have a good work-life balance quicker. So yes, the second manager seems less palatable to us as employees, but in reality, sometimes these people can have the right goal for you. The history of efficiency in business is hard to trace, as many concepts like this, but I think it really goes back to car manufacturers. There were car manufacturers that were watching Toyota, and they were absolutely impressed by what they saw. Toyota was using a concept called Kaizen. Is there anyone Japanese in here? Okay, am I totally destroying that word, Kaizen? Okay, awesome. With a room this size, you have experts on everything, so Kaizen. And Kaizen is the idea of continuous iterative improvement. 3 buzzwords in a row. What that really means is you have a process that you follow to keep on improving slowly over time so that eventually you make a big improvement. With Kaizen, many manufacturers would time their employees through various tasks and look at how they were working. They would notice small things, like people leaving their workstation to grab a pair of tools that should have been at their workstation. And by watching and observing the work, they were able to figure out what they could do to really improve that workflow. And Japanese manufacturers were killing it at this time because they were doing this, American manufacturers were not. And it took a long time for us to catch up because we were not using this principle of continuous improvement of efficiency. Here's an example of something that you can solve with Kaizen. Someone noticed that one of the workers would work on this tool that would kind of wind down his gloves over time, and so he had to get rid of them and go get new ones. But he noticed every time he threw away the gloves, he would go, walk, leave the building. 10 minutes later, he would come back with a new pair of gloves. So what's going on? So he starts to talk to the employee, and he asks him about it, and he says, well, sir, it's loss prevention. They don't want you to just take gloves home, so every time you destroy a pair of gloves, you need to return it to them, show them proof that it was destroyed, then you need to get manager approval to get a new pair of gloves. Wow. Oh, and by the way, it's out of the warehouse and across the street to that building over there. Just by eliminating that one step, he was able to change 10 minutes at a time for several hours each day and save countless hours over a year's span. So efficiency is really important as a concept, but unfortunately, some managers do it in a way that is very aggressive and guilt-ridden. They will time their employees. They will watch them to make sure they're diligent. To me, that's not the way to do it. I've developed this really cool personality trait. It's called kindness. I don't like to make people feel bad. I don't know if you guys have that personality trait. I think it's really cool. Well, anyway, kindness means you can take efficiency and make it fun and make it something that people want to do. Because to me, efficiency isn't about working harder and putting your nose to the grindstone. That sounds awful and gruesome. It means that you're actually going to feel lazy because you have set things up for yourself so well that it's much easier to do your job. And remember the example of me taking a walk at work? Well, that would not have been possible if I had just continued doing the thing the same way over and over again. My definition of efficiency is the practice of making your time more valuable. Let's unpack 3 of those words. Practice. It's a process that you continually do. Time. Time is our most valuable and limited resource. You can't get more of your time, but you can make it more valuable and get more out of your time. And lastly, value. Value is incredibly important because what you choose to be efficient towards will guide everything that you do. For example, some of you may be at the point where, to you, the most important thing is to spend time with your family. And if spending time with your family is your value, then how you're efficient will change. You're going to try to reduce the amount of time you spend at work. You're going to try to reduce tasks that take you away from your family or find ways to do it with your family, right? But if your value is to increase revenue for your small business, then you're going to find ways to do that. So your value is very important. So efficiency is the practice of making your time more valuable. And as a result, you gain freedom. Imagine if you can take all of the work that you do and do it in half of the time. What would you do with the rest of that time? I know what I would do. I would sip pina coladas. I won't continue for your ears' sake. I want to ask you a series of questions, and I want you to say yes if it applies to you. Let's practice. Say yes. Yes. I was practicing to get you to say yes twice because the second time has to be a little bit louder, but it was a little bit too loud the first time, so we'll go with that. Have you ever complained that there's not enough time in the day?
Yes.
Have you ever dropped a hobby or not pursued a hobby because you thought, I have too much work to do?
Yes.
No? This is the hobby master over here. Have you ever said no to a friend because you're just too busy?
Yes.
How many of you have had the conversation? This is not a yes question, by the way. How many of you have had the conversation with a friend or acquaintance that you haven't seen for a long time? And it goes something like this. Hey man, how's it going? I could make it gender neutral, but too much cognitive effort for that. Hey man, how's it going? Oh, it's been so long since I've seen you. Oh man, I'm busy these days, but it's going well. Oh yeah, busy. I'm so busy. Oh yeah, man, so busy. And it's just back and forth about how busy you are because you feel guilty about not seeing each other, and eventually you part ways having discovered how busy the other person is. America has this go, go, go mentality, and yet we never go to where we're trying to go. We never get there. And I think that's sad because we could set goals, we could achieve them in ways that won't ruin our work-life balance or won't ruin aspects of our life that we value. And yet we just keep going, keep moving forward, keep doing the same thing over and over again. So let's discover this hidden source of freedom together. Let's talk about some sources of inefficiency. I have 10, so those notes are going to be very helpful. The first one is searching. Have you ever searched for lost keys that you don't know where they are? Yes?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, you don't have to say yes for the rest of the speech, by the way. You're welcome to, though. It's really great for my ego. So searching is whenever you're looking for something that you should already know where it is. I remember a week where I used our sales phone number in emails multiple times, but I always forgot what it was. So I'd have to look it up, go to the Contact Us page, figure out which phone number of the 10 there are, and then put it into the email. And I was just being lazy. I could have taken the time to either memorize it or write it down where I'll be able to keep it and then move on, and I would have saved my time searching. The second one is waiting. Waiting is really obvious. How many times have you sent a message to someone and then just ceased all brain activity while you wait for them to respond? Sally can't get back to you immediately, so cool it a little bit. Take some time, do something else, and wait for the notification to pop up and distract you. The third one is task switching, which is relevant. Task switching is the idea that you can't really multitask. You actually just move between two tasks really quickly. Now, my wife and I have this argument all the time that women are better at multitasking than men. Probably true. But do you realize that when you're multitasking, you're often doing something that requires no cognitive effort along with something that does? For example, peeling a potato while talking to someone, and occasionally you do cut your finger. The reality is, if you were to multitask trying to write an email about one topic while talking to someone about a different topic, you can't do that. You're just switching between the two inefficiently. And there's this space that I call the cognitive gap, where you're switching between tasks that you're thinking about absolutely nothing, because your brain is taking time to switch. So it's completely inefficient, and you're often going to make more mistakes and have more trouble. So we've all learned probably from multiple different gurus, stop multitasking, and in most cases that's true because of task switching. A fourth one is deliberating. So whenever you're taking time to think about the next thing that you should do, or making a decision that should be really easy to make, deliberating wastes a lot of time because a lot of people are afraid to make a decision. They're afraid of the costs of either side. And as a result, they're just sitting there waiting and thinking. One of the most common ways this happens is you have a list of tasks to do in your head, but you keep forgetting. As you finish each task, you're like, what's the next task? Instead, you should have it written down in a prioritized list so that as soon as you finish the last one, you know what the next one is going to be. Another one is opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the idea of doing something that's somewhat valuable while there's something that's way more valuable that you could be doing. So for example, if you are, I don't even need to give an example, you already know what this means. Opportunity cost is one of the most hidden sources of inefficiency because it can feel like you're being productive. You're making progress towards a task. But oftentimes, you could have used that time to do something more valuable, and as a result, it was not the most efficient thing to do. Another one is perfectionism, and this one is delightfully controversial. There's really two types of people, along with all the other types of people. There's perfectionists, and there's people who are what we call satisficers. They're satisfied, and they're ready to move on to the next task. Studies have found that perfectionists tend to be less happy, more stressed out, and get less done because they're so worried about getting the last 1% of detail done in their projects that they're missing the bigger picture. And oftentimes there's an opportunity cost to them finishing their work. Look at the tasks that you do. Oftentimes you complete them 100% and take so much time doing the last piece of it that you could have just been doing something else and getting more value out of it. Misalignment is the next one. And this is the idea that some people are better at certain tasks than others. As a result, in a group of 2 or more people, you should be looking at what each person's skill set is compared to the work that you have to do, because many times the wrong person is doing the wrong job. And if you're a manager, if you manage people, your job is to figure out where you can set those skills and match them up with the tasks at hand so that you're not having people waste time on something that Johnny could do a lot faster. Mistakes. So I've talked about perfectionism, but there's also mistakes, right? Sometimes you make a mistake because you're moving too quickly, and as a result, you have to go back and fix that mistake. Here's an example that might help you figure out that balance between perfectionism and mistakes. How many of you learned how to type on a typewriter? Oh my word. I do know what it is. It's a heavy metal object that I've looked at a couple of times in my life. My mom learned how to type on a typewriter. She was a secretary, and the way she learned to type was slow and perfect. Because if you make a mistake, it's really difficult to fix that, right? And I have coworkers that do the double space thing still on a computer. Very frustrating to me. But on a typewriter, those mistakes are costly, and so you have to type a little bit slower to make it happen. Also, those keys are really heavy to push down, and you get nice finger muscles, if those exist. But on a computer, you have to shift your mindset, right? Because you can correct those mistakes much, much quicker. So here's an example. You could type 50 words per minute perfectly. Some of you are thinking, I wish. Or you could type 80 words per minute with 2 mistakes per paragraph. Which is better? Well, making a couple mistakes that you can just press delete and go back again is worth the extra speed. So that's the trade-off there. And then you have to find where you're making too many mistakes and thus slowing yourself down or causing issues with quality. So that's that balance between mistakes and perfectionism. Redoing. Many people do the same task over and over again at different days or different times, different mindsets, and they don't really document how to do that best for themselves. As a result, have you ever come back to a task that you knew how to do and then you have to discover all over again how you need to do it? So redoing is a huge waste of time. If you take the time to document your process or to come up with a better way of doing it, then you're going to save yourself a lot of time in the long run, even if it takes time to document that. Lastly, inexperience. Often we assume that we're just going to get better at things over time by doing it, right? Most of us get stronger in life, like physically stronger, just by doing everyday activities, whatever happens to come up. Some people, like Blue Shirt over there, train, right? They actually go to the gym, they make themselves stronger in order to be prepared for bigger obstacles. It takes time to train, right? And it may even seem inefficient, but if your job is to move things, which maybe it's not, but if your job was to move things, then it's better to take the time to train than to just get better by moving things all the time. Does that make sense? Taking the time to train and actually do focused practice to improve yourself can really help you in the long run. For me, I can type at 120 to 130 words per minute because when I was a kid, I put in a little Typing Tutor 7 CD or floppy disk, can't remember. Yes, I know what those are. And I took the time to really learn how to type quickly. So taking the time to learn tasks that you do all the time is worth it. Have you ever seen those videos, of viral videos of someone, maybe in the food industry, doing something really, really quickly, like gutting a watermelon or cutting slices of something, whatever they're doing, and they just look impossibly good at it? Well, do you think they got good at it by just doing it? No. They took the time to memorize certain motions, to really think about what is the optimal way to do that. So taking that time is first an expenditure, but is actually just a time investment. All right, so now you know what the sources of inefficiency are. I want you to do an efficiency audit. And this is really simple. Efficiency audit makes it sound like a snooze fest. Kind of is. But, thank you. But it's very, very, very valuable, especially when you're starting out on this road. So what you need to do is take a week and just look at what you do. Observe yourself, time it. There are apps that you can use to time it. There are desktop apps that you can use to time it. There are pieces of paper that you can use to time it. And just record how much time you spend on each thing. And then look back over everything that you've done and evaluate whether you want to be spending your time on those things. Do you spend too much time on laundry for your benefit? Do you spend too much time answering emails at work? I do. So you take a look at the things that you wish you could spend less time on, and then you take a look at the things that you wish you could spend more time on. Time with family, or time on vacation, whatever that is. Once you've done that audit, you're well equipped to figure out where you can actually change things. So taking the sources of inefficiency that I just taught you, 10 different sources, you can look at the things that you're doing and look for those sources of inefficiency so that you can actually get to that goal of improving your time on this and decreasing your time on that. Does that make sense? The only way you're going to actually do this is to take the time to do an audit and not just think, okay, well, I'll try to be more efficient. That never works. You have to actually say, this week I'm going to record my time, do the whole process, and then take your time to evaluate it. Next thing you want to do is create a system, because you want this to be a repeatable process that you can continually do and iterate on, right? It's not something that you just look at one week and then discard for the rest of your life. You need to be able to keep improving as the Kaizen philosophy teaches. So as you go throughout your day, look for sources of inefficiency that match the list of 10. And when you find one, you have a couple of options. If it's something that you're just doing once right now and you know what the fix is, then you can just do it more efficiently then. But if it's something that you do all the time, it's a recurring task, or it's a very large project, then take the time to write down what it is that is inefficient and maybe some potential solutions. Whatever you can think of, and then set it aside. Then select one day of the week that you're going to review all of these notes. Whether it's a Saturday or Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm not going to say the rest. And you choose that day, you look at everything that you've written down in one place, and you look for potential solutions. Then you decide on which solutions to implement and keep that somewhere, so that next time you run into that same problem, you have a solution, you have a better way of doing it. Does that make sense? It's really simple. If you follow a system, then you're more likely to actually stay on the boat. And lastly, I want to talk to you about some principles of efficiency. Here are some ideas that you can use to become more efficient. Not just look for ways that you're becoming inefficient, but look for ways to become efficient. The first one is called the 80-20 rule, or Pareto principle. How many of you have heard of this? That's great. How many of you actually live by this? Ooh. So I don't have to explain it to you. The 20% of your results, or 80% of your results come from 20% of your time, right? the 80-20 principle is really a guiding thing for my life, because every time that I'm working on something, I start to ask myself, am I working on this too long? Working on this speech. I would love to work on speeches for 8 hours at a time for several days and just really nail them down, write down everything and memorize every line. But at the end of the day, it's not that useful. If I spend 5 hours preparing for a speech and I memorize several key points, I can go in doing about 80% as good as I would do if I had spent the extra time. There's always going to be more speeches to give, so I can't take the time every speech to actually prepare that much. 80-20 principle is extremely valuable for reducing the amount of time you spend on tasks. The next one is to improve on recurring tasks. Really focus on those, because tasks that you do one time are just not that important because they may never come up again. The things that you do all the time, that's where you can actually make a big difference on your weeks, on your months. What I do is I like to document large projects before I begin and as I go through them. So when I was planning for my wedding, we planned really, really well. We had everything planned out ahead of time and it went super smoothly. But at the same time, we were planning our honeymoon in Italy. I don't speak Italian, even though I have an Italian name. Nor does my wife, if you're thinking that's the excuse. So we went to Italy, not speaking Italian, which is pretty normal, except that this was our first time living together, and it was really, really difficult because we were trying to get used to being together, and here we are in Italy trying to talk to these people who know a little bit of English, a little bit of Spanish. I tried German because I learned a little German. They didn't know that. Every time I asked them, do you speak English, do you speak Italian? I said it in my broken Italian. They would say, un po', a little bit. And that very much varied from person to person. One person's little was another person's fluent. So it was very difficult to get along and go through this trip. That's because I didn't plan it. We had problems like almost getting arrested on the bus for not having a ticket. Our Airbnb was up a mountain instead of in the middle of the city. And there was one rackety old bus that would go to it every day, like 5 times. So you had to coordinate all your meal runs. We almost starved one day. Not literally starved, but we literally almost didn't find enough food for the day. So it was a little bit stressful, and that's because I didn't take the time to plan. But with large projects, not only do you want to plan ahead of time, but you also want to document as you go through what your progress has been, what you've learned. So what I do is I have as many large projects as I'm working on in a note-taking app. And as I make progress, I'll write down the dates and what I did so that if my boss asks, I can just open it up and say everything that I've done. And if I return to that project after a while, I can actually look back and say, oh, that's what I was doing, this is where I need to pick up, and I can continue. Instead of just assuming that you'll remember everything that you need to know. Be aware of your future self. Your future self is a very tricky thing. It tends to be kind of an idiot because your future self doesn't remember what you were thinking currently. Have you ever written a note for yourself and then found it absolutely incomprehensible later? Yes. And you thought, who taught this person to write? Well, that's because your future self doesn't have the same frame of mind as your current self, and you lose a lot of those memories. So be aware of your future self whenever you're doing something that you're going to have to pick up later, because it's so easy to write down too little information because you're trying to save on time, and then later you won't remember what you were trying to say, and you won't be able to actually get value out of that. And lastly, group together similar tasks. If you spend a lot of time responding to emails throughout your day and you're interrupting other work, what if you only respond to email 2 different times a day, once in the morning, once in the evening, and that's all? Unless your job is to respond to email, you will be able to get away with that. And if anyone needs something, they can come interrupt you and you can scold them. So I was going to close with something about how efficiency could be the difference between working at a hot dog stand or data entry. But I realize that none of you are in the stage of life where that's a concern. But what you do feel, what I feel, what everyone feels, is the sensation of the sands of time slipping through your fingers. You feel like you can never collect enough of it. With efficiency, you have the chance to actually collect some of that sand and pour it into the hourglass of your choice. Thank you.